The machines we build to move mountains have buried the people who ran them. These are the deadliest heavy equipment and construction disasters on record, told from the rigging up. We are going to walk through what the cranes, the dams, the spoil tips, and the drilling rigs actually did when they failed, and who paid for it. Some of these numbers will be hard to hear. Treat them the way the families do, with respect, because every figure here was somebody clocking in for a shift. Number 10. The Hawks Nest Tunnel in West Virginia. Between 1930 and 1935, crews bored a 3-mile water tunnel through Gauley Mountain to feed power to a Union Carbide plant downstream. The mountain turned out to be nearly pure silica. To save time, the contractor pushed the men to drill dry instead of wet, which meant the jackleg drills threw fine, white silica dust into the air with no water to knock it down. Inside that tunnel, the dust was so thick the foreman could barely see the headlamps. The men breathed it shift after shift. Silica dust does not pass through. It scars the lungs into stone, a disease called silicosis. Workers started dying within months of starting, far faster than anyone expected, because the air they breathed was almost pure ground glass. The project hired close to 5,000 men over its run, and nearly 3,000 of them worked underground. Most of the dead were black migrant laborers, and many were buried in unmarked field graves in a nearby field, some of them while their families were still trying to find out where they had gone. The verified death toll from a federal investigation puts it at least 764 men, and some researchers estimate closer to 2,000. A congressional inquiry followed, along with more than 500 lawsuits. It remains one of the worst industrial disasters in American history, caused not by an explosion, but by a drilling decision made to beat a schedule. Number 9. Bangqiao Dam in Henan Province, China. This is the single deadliest equipment failure in this entire video, and most operators have never heard of it. Bangqiao was an earthen flood control and hydroelectric dam built in the early 1950s, designed to survive a 1,000-year flood. In August 1975, Typhoon Nina dumped a flood twice that size on the basin. The sluice gates could not discharge fast enough, partly because silt had clogged them, and the communication lines were down, so nobody could coordinate the release. If you want to see the disasters the equipment world tries to forget, subscribe to QuiSoup. If you are watching on your TV, find QuiSoup and hit subscribe there. On August 8th, Bangqiao overtopped and failed, and the failure cascaded through 61 other dams downstream, like a row of falling blocks. A wall of water swept across the plain. The immediate flood killed roughly 26,000 people, and the official accounting estimates that another 145,000 died afterward from the epidemics and famine that followed. Estimates of the total range from 26,000 to as high as 240,000. It flattened between 5 and almost 7 million homes and put more than 10 million people in the path of the water. The failure spread across roughly 12,000 square kilometers. One earthen structure, undersized at the gates and choked with silt, took more lives than any other equipment failure ever recorded, and outside of China, most people in the trade have never once heard its name. Number 8. The Vajont Dam in northern Italy. Finished in 1959, Vajont was one of the tallest concrete arch dams on Earth, and the dam itself never broke. That is the haunting part. The engineers knew the mountain on the reservoir's flank, Monte Toc, was sliding. They had watched it creep for years, and they kept filling the reservoir anyway. On the night of October 9th, 1963, 260 million cubic meters of mountain let go and slammed into the full reservoir at once. The water had nowhere to go but up and over. A wave, roughly 250 meters tall, launched over the top of the dam and dropped into the valley below, erasing the town of Longarone and 4 other villages in minutes. More than 2,000 people died, with many counts reaching 2,500 or higher. The dam stood. The people did not. Vajont is the textbook case of ignoring the ground your structure sits on. Number 7. Aberfan, in the South Wales coal field. For decades, the Merthyr Vale colliery dumped its mining waste, the crushed rock and slurry left after the coal was pulled, into towering spoil tips on the mountainside above the village. Tip number 7 was piled directly over a natural spring. The water saturated the waste from below. On the morning of October 21st, 1966, after heavy rain, the tip turned to liquid and slid down the slope as a black avalanche. It hit Pantglass Junior School while the children were at their desks. 144 people died. 116 of them were children. The town council had warned the National Coal Board about those tips years earlier, and nothing was done. Britain passed a new law to govern mining tips 3 years later, written in the names of those kids. Number 6. The Brumadinho Dam in Minas Gerais, Brazil. This one is recent, January 25th, 2019, and it should be fresh in every mining operator's mind. Brumadinho was an iron ore tailings dam owned by Vale, holding back the wet sludge waste from ore processing. It was built with the upstream method, the cheapest and most fragile design, and it had been decommissioned 3 years before. There was no warning. Seepage inside the structure quietly liquefied the tailings until the whole face let go in seconds. About 10 million cubic meters of mud rolled downhill, and it hit the mine's own cafeteria at lunchtime. At least 270 people were killed, many of them Vale employees and contractors eating their meal, and bodies were still being recovered from the hardened mud a year later. The mud also tore out a railway bridge and poured toxic waste into the Paraopeba River, ruining it downstream. Vale was ordered to pay billions in damages, and the failure tightened tailings dam rules worldwide. The dam gave no signal at all before it failed. Number 5. The Mufulira Mine in Zambia. On September 25th, 1970, on the Copperbelt, a tailings dam sitting on the surface broke through into the mine workings directly beneath it. Sinkholes and small mud ingress had appeared in the 2 years before, and management did not investigate them properly. In the early hours, around 1 million tons of water and slimes poured down through the rock into the haulages where the night shift was working. The mud reached the men in 10 to 15 minutes. 89 miners died underground, 64 mine employees, and 25 contractors. It is still the worst mining disaster in Zambia's history, and it cut the country's copper output in half. Quick break before we get into what happened next. If you have been on this channel for a while watching how these machines are built and how they fail, there is a way to make sure you do not miss what is coming. Join the operator tier for $4.99 a month. You get badges that mark you as a working professional in the comment section, custom emoji to call out the corporate decisions that killed Cat, and you get every video 24 hours before the rest of the internet. To join, open your phone and search Quisoup membership, or go to the channel page and tap join. Join the operators and engineers who are paying attention. Now, back to it. Number 4. The Willow Island Cooling Tower in West Virginia. April 27th, 1978. Crews were building a natural draft cooling tower at the Pleasance Power Station, pouring concrete in 5-foot lifts, 1 ring per day. The scaffolding was bolted directly into the fresh concrete, and a crane mounted on top hoisted the buckets. That morning, the tower had reached 166 feet. The problem was the concrete the scaffold was anchored to had been poured only about 20 hours earlier in near-freezing weather, and it had not cured enough to hold. Bolts were missing, and the ones in place were the wrong grade. As the third bucket came up, the anchorage failed, the crane fell inward, and the entire scaffold ring peeled off the tower. 51 workers riding that scaffold fell with it. All 51 died. It is considered the deadliest construction accident in United States history, and OSHA cited the contractors for 20 violations afterward. Number 3. The Sampoong Department Store in Seoul, South Korea. June 29th, 1995. This was not a job site. It was a 5-story store full of shoppers, but it died from construction and heavy equipment decisions. The owner had changed the building from offices to retail, cut support columns to widen the aisles, and added an unplanned 5th floor. Then, the heavy air conditioning units on the roof were dragged across the slab instead of being craned into place, cracking the structure beneath them. On a hot afternoon, the cracks finally won. The building dropped into its own basement in under 20 seconds. 502 people were killed and more than 900 injured. The chairman had been warned of the cracks that very morning and kept the store open to protect a day of sales. Number 2. The Big Blue Crane in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. July 14th, 1999. Big Blue was a Lamson LTL 1500 transi lift, one of the largest crawler cranes on Earth. More than 500 feet of boom, lifting the retractable roof sections onto Miller Park. The wind was gusting into the mid-30s in miles per hour, well past what the lift chart allowed for that load. The crew lifted anyway. The crane was simply outside its design limits for the combination of weight and wind. As the section swung, the crane lost it and went over. 3 ironworkers, Jeffrey Wisher, William DeGrave, and Jerome Starr, were riding a man basket on a second crane nearby to guide the piece in. The falling boom struck their basket. All 3 were killed. The stadium opening was delayed a full year. The lesson is the oldest one in rigging, which is that the load chart is not a suggestion. What is the harder failure to forgive? The dam, where the engineers watched the mountain move for years and kept filling the reservoir, or the crane lift made in wind everyone on the ground could feel was wrong? One is a slow institutional sin, and the other is a single bad call on a single morning. Tell me in the comments. Number 1. The tower crane on East 51st Street in Manhattan, March 15th, 2008. A tower crane climbing alongside a high-rise needs steel collars to tie it to the building as it grows. That day, the crew was raising an 11,000-pound steel collar into position. The rigging was done improperly, the collar dropped, and it sheared off the crane's lower ties to the building. With its anchors gone, the entire tower crane peeled away from the structure and fell across the neighborhood. It demolished a 4-story brownstone and damaged more than a dozen buildings. 7 people died, 6 construction workers, and 1 woman in a nearby apartment who had nothing to do with the job. The crane stood roughly 250 feet at the moment it came down. It is the disaster that forced New York to rewrite how tower cranes are inspected and climbed in a dense city. Every one of these came back to the same few things: speed chosen over safety, a load or a slope or a span pushed past what the structure was ever built to hold, warnings that sat on someone's desk in writing, while the men kept clocking in and working below. The machines, the dams, the cranes, and the drilling rigs did exactly what physics said they would do. On schedule, without mercy. One more thing before you go. If you really want to be part of the inner circle on this channel, join the Site Foreman for $9.99 a month. You get a public shout-out in upcoming videos. Your name, your operation, your story, validated in front of the entire QuiSoup audience. Plus everything from the operator tier. To join, open your phone and search QuiSoup membership, or go to the channel page and tap join. And remember, almost every disaster in this video was predicted by somebody on site before it happened, which means the real cause was never the equipment. It was the decision to ignore the person who knew. See you in the next one.